welcome to On Point. I'm Tomi Lahren. Well, I've got some good news and I've got some bad news, but let's start with the good news first. The good news is that we live on the greatest nation on earth. Our nation is rich in history and democracy. Our people, brave and proud. Our nation was founded and is deeply rooted in faith, freedom, and family values. But now for the bad news. Those values have fallen under attack. Single-parent households have more than tripled since 1960, and to make matters worse, take-home pay has been reduced while the price of energy and goods has gone through the roof. While the entitlement system is overburdened and the free-for-all mentality at the border isn't helping. But these troubles extend beyond our borders. Russia and its president are becoming more powerful by the day. In the Middle East, ISIS is threatening to undo years of progress fought for by our brave men and women. Meantime, the world is taking sides as the conflict in the Gaza Strip rages on. Our only true ally in the Middle East, Israel, left wondering if we have their backs as rockets continue to light up the sky. Take a look.
Hamas is a terror organization that is committed to our destruction, supported bin Laden, condemned you for taking action against bin Laden. I think you can't get social and economic relief for the people of Gaza without having assured demilitarization, because otherwise all the money, all the concrete, all the cement that will go in will not be used to offer relief to the people of Gaza, but to build more terror tunnels and more rockets and more missiles.
Violence has become the status quo in Gaza, and trying for peace is risky, so the crisis continues. Joining me now to shed some light on the ongoing conflict in the Middle East is the founder and chairman of Voices for Conservative Youth, Joshua Nass. Josh, Israel has taken a lot of heat for civilian casualties, but argues that this is unavoidable because Hamas is using civilians as human shields. Is this a legitimate assessment? What's your take?
It is a legitimate assessment, Tommy. And I wish it was an assessment that the administration understood as well. Hamas is committing a double war crime here by using their own people, that is the Palestinians, as human shields. And let's not forget that Hamas was democratically elected. The Palestinians themselves elected Hamas. But to the extent that we hear media coverage casting a lot of negative coverage against Israel for the incredible amount of casualties among the Palestinians, the responsibility does not lie with Israel. It lies with Hamas.
Now, I'm going to play devil's advocate here, Josh. Should Israel be doing more to prevent these civilian casualties? And if so, what could they possibly do to better address the situation?
I can state unequivocally that there is no military on earth that takes the steps necessary and goes to the lengths necessary in order to avoid human casualties than does the Israeli military. This is a very personal conflict for me and a personal story for me because I have relatives and immediate family members serving in the Israeli Defense Forces. They do this in a tremendously surgical way by going ahead and distributing leaflets prior to striking, by even knocking on some doors in certain cases. So Israel is doing all it can possibly do in order to prevent human casualties. It's Hamas, once again, that is responsible for the killing of innocent civilians.
So I want to turn now, too. You mentioned Hamas. So is Israel expected to be able to negotiate with Hamas? I mean, obviously, you've got a sovereign state trying to come to make deals with essentially a terrorist network. So is that even possible at this point? What are your thoughts on that?
You called it a terrorist network, and that's exactly what it is. In fact, that's what the United States State Department recognizes it as.
Correct, yes.
You cannot possibly negotiate with an actor or an entity that doesn't believe in your existence. In fact, in this case, Hamas has in its charter the destruction of the state of Israel. So how can you possibly expect there to be any semblance of coexistence when one actor in Hamas refuses to even acknowledge the existence of the state of Israel?
Well, I absolutely agree with you, Josh. I mean, they're committed to the absolute destruction of Israel, and they're very upfront about this. I want to turn now to the coverage of this crisis, because we've been bombarded with it for days. What do you think of the media's coverage of what's going on? Is it being fair and balanced?
Well, some networks have been fairer than others. I won't point out which have been less fair, but I think the most important thing to note here is the tremendous amount of information that's been disseminated this time around via social media and all types of digital media platforms.
Very true.
More so than any other time before. So there are different sources of information out there that are reliable, where you can receive factual information. And it's my hope that folks across the globe are turning to those outlets in order to find out the nature of the conflict.
Right, Josh, and you mentioned social media. We're getting a lot of images. Obviously, every day we're seeing all these gruesome images coming out of Gaza. Do you think that that kind of distorts the reality for a lot of Americans and the rest of the nations? We have a lot of people coming out pro-Palestinian for the first time. Do you think the media is playing a role in that?
Well, I'm not sure this is the first time that there are people in the media and outside the media coming out as being pro-Palestinian. In fact, I don't think those that are advocating for the interests of the other side that is being anti-Israel are necessarily being pro-Palestinian. I think you're actually being anti-Palestinian by being pro-Hamas, because Hamas is actually responsible for the deaths of these innocent Palestinians. But what I would say is that social media has really afforded folks the opportunity to find the factual information about this conflict. And to the extent that there's inaccurate information out there, it's always going to be out there. It's left to the reader or to the viewer to really do their due diligence.
Yeah, that's absolutely true, and I absolutely agree with you on that. And, you know, speaking of current events that are happening right now, Israel did attack the only power plant. Do you think this was a step too far? What do you think?
Look, we don't know. Not all the facts have been uncovered about that.
Very true.
And I know the media likes to kind of get ahead of certain stories, and it's very easy to have Israel serve as the scapegoat to blame. It's important for us to kind of take a step back and analyze this conflict from what instigated it. Hamas instigated this conflict by abducting and murdering 3 Israeli youths, innocent Israeli youths, in cold blood. They're the ones responsible for provoking this conflict, and they're the ones responsible for the killing of innocent Palestinian civilians. They are using Palestinians as human shields. They are using innocent civilians' homes.
Now, Josh, I agree with you, but it's kind of been, I mean, to be fair, it's been a kind of a tit for tat, and this has been going on for decades, so I guess we're going to have to wait and see as more information comes out about this. And you're absolutely right, we need to make sure we're getting both sides of the issue, and I hope that here at One America we can certainly do that. Thanks so much for being with us, Josh. I really appreciate your insight. And coming up next, are Americans losing faith in religion? We'll dig into this and more when On Point returns. Stay with us.
And though we are obviously far from perfect, and we know that, no place has ever welcomed so many different faiths to worship as freely as here in the United States of America. It's something that we are extraordinarily proud of. But freedom of religion is not an American invention. It's a universal value, and it's enshrined in our Constitution, and it's ingrained in every human heart. The freedom to profess and practice one's faith is the birthright of every human being. And that's what we believe.
Well, there's nothing new about Americans losing faith in political institutions. This has been a trend for decades, but Gallup numbers and Pew Research shows that Americans are losing faith in organized religion. This is more noticeable among millennials. We're talking to God, but not necessarily looking to religion for guidance. Joining me now to discuss this interesting phenomenon is social and historical columnist Joseph Cotto. Thanks so much for joining us today, Joseph.
Thanks for having me on.
All right, now your article for Delaware Online paints a pretty grim picture of religion in America, so why do you think it's on the decline?
Well, I think that among younger people, there's greater access to technology than previous generations had. Well, I think most people in America have access to the technology, but younger people tend to take advantage of that. And when you see so many different things, when you are able to learn about so many different ideas and see how different types of people live, it's very difficult to believe in a specific creed as having all the answers to life's difficult problems.
So I said in my open, too, that we're talking to God, especially millennials. We're still looking for some sort of spirituality and faith, but it's not necessarily organized in religion. So would you say that that's fair to say, that we're still spiritual, but just not going to the actual church for that guidance?
I would say that's very accurate. I do think that there are still some young people who turn to organized religion. It's just not to the same degree that was seen in previous generations.
Why do you think we're backing away from this structure? Is it just us being rebellious?
No, not at all. I think it's more than anything else, it has to do with the technological boom over the last 25 or so years. Today, you could go online, you could see religions and learn about them, which your grandparents might never have even known existed. So when you're able to do that, like I said, it's very difficult to turn to any specific creed as having a sort of authority which another doesn't. Although, of course, while religions are very different from one another, and people might have loyalty toward one over another because they were raised in it or it was prevalent in the area in which they were brought up, it's just difficult to exalt one when you know there's so many other different ways of believing in the divine out there.
All right, well, I mean, that's understandable. I suppose more information, we're getting more of an influx of that. But what kind of implications does this have if we don't have that structure of organized religion? Does it have any for the way we live our lives?
Oh, I think it absolutely does. I think that people, to one extent or another, are religious because religion is simply a code of beliefs to which one holds fast. I think, though, that as time goes on, you'll see the decline of, say, ministers or priests or even rabbis, and perhaps more secular authorities will be given preference in our society. Now, that could either be good or bad. It's impossible to say at this point. But I do think that people are still going to be religious. That's just part of the human condition. It just won't be, they won't express their religion in the sort of organized theological form which has been done for generations on end.
Okay, and I want to ask you, too, what kind of implications this has for government, but I also want to remind the viewers that our nation was founded on democratic values, which are based in the Judeo-Christian tradition. So I think democracy in some form or another will always be rooted in at least these values, if not a specific religion, maybe not, but the values. So what do you think about this? What does this decline have to do with government? Are we going to see any kind of changes over the next few years with this decline in organized religion?
I think we'll definitely see changes in terms of public policy. The religious right won't have the sort of power among Republicans that it traditionally has. We'll probably see a rise of libertarianism there. For the Democratic Party, organized religion has had a significant amount of power, but it's been in a very different way than, say, the religious right. They've more focused on economic issues rather than social ones. But even there, I think you'll see a decline as well, but it won't be as pronounced just because religion and social values among Democrats was never important in the same way that it was for Republicans. On average, of course, there are great things.
Joseph, I want to stop you there because I do understand what you're saying. However, I do think that religion still has a place in this country because we see rulings coming down like the Hobby Lobby and the religious freedom cases, and that caused quite an uproar. So clearly Americans still care about religious freedom. So I don't think that it's fair to say that we're necessarily abandoning it or it might change our public policy because we're still firmly rooted in those beliefs from what I've seen in recent events. What do you think?
I think that the country as a whole still is. I think that the people who were most concerned over the Hobby Lobby ruling were middle-aged, from what I could tell, just looking at news reports. I do think, though, that there are a great many young activists who use organized religion as a linchpin of their life philosophy, and they certainly were very concerned about what happened. And I think they were very pleased by the Supreme Court's ultimate decision in the matter. So it's still going to stay around, organized religion. I think it'll always, with any society. I mean, the Soviet Union, when they tried to suppress it, it came roaring back to life in the 1990s. And today, Russia is far more religious than America on average, especially among younger people. So it's always going to have a place, like I said, in any society. But I think that in America, it will just have a different place during the years to come. It'll be less domineering, but I think it certainly will be an inspiration to most people, and to one extent or another. But for the people who use it as like a linchpin, that's going to decline. But then again, 20 years from now, it might change again. The pendulum swings.
I think you're right about that. I think the pendulum definitely swings, and it's certainly generational. And thanks, Joseph, so much for sharing your insight with us. And coming up next, same-sex marriage. The rulings are rolling in, and debate is heating up. This and more when On Point continues. Stay with us.
We just want the cultural status of being married, because we are. And it, ultimately it's just unconstitutional, and it's unfair, and it's unjust not to extend that to all loving and committed couples.
Well, the rulings are pouring in. A slew of states are now declaring bans on same-sex marriage unconstitutional. It's legal in 19 states and the District of Columbia, with every remaining state ban facing a court challenge. This is causing quite the shakeup, and it's just a matter of time before the Supreme Court will have to address the issue. Now, here to weigh in on this controversial subject is the president of San Diego's Log Cabin Republicans, Susan Jester. Thank you, Susan, so much for being here. And the first question I have for you is there such a thing as being a gay conservative?
Well, of course there is. You're looking at one.
Perfect. I'm so glad to have you. Can you kind of explain what that means to be a gay conservative for those that may not think that that exists?
Well, I think the answer to that is gay conservative is no different than Hispanic conservative or African American conservative or white Anglo-Saxon conservative. It doesn't really have anything to do with your sexual orientation. Gay community, traditionally, their spokespersons are the left, and a lot of the leadership from the 60s and 70s came from the left movement and the progressive movement. But exit polls show nationally and locally and statewide that about 40% of, anywhere from 25 to 40% of LGBT people vote Republican.
So why do you think it is that we're not getting enough press for people like yourself who find themselves probably fiscally conservative, the economy's on their main agenda, but obviously the left has pandered to you guys so much so that the gay conservatives, they don't get much of a voice. Why do you think this is?
Well, I think it's the nature of the beast, actually, in terms of being a conservative person ideologically. The same reason I think the Republicans have a hard time getting their message out. We're just average, folks that think like most average Americans, and it doesn't grab the headlines if we're not throwing ourselves against the White House fence.
Well, yeah, the squeaky wheel always seems to get the grease, doesn't it?
Exactly.
But I have to ask you, so obviously the Republican Party, are some leaders that are coming out in support of same-sex marriage and being more tolerant. Do you think that the platform of the Republican Party needs to change coming into the midterms and then ultimately the general election?
Well, absolutely. I just actually was having a conversation with a fairly high-placed leader in the Republican Party, and he suggested to me that, it's time to move on from marriage equality. Those really aren't, and I think the thing that's really disappointing to those of us that are conservative and are Republicans, that those issues are not constitutional issues. They're not Republican issues. They're not Republican values. And we would very much like to see our party win, because it's more about what direction America is going in. And in order to right the ship, we need to get back to those basic values and market our values, which are winning values in terms of economic freedom and prosperity, to the American public, and get off the social issues that most people really don't care about.
That's true. And I mean, a lot of people think that gay conservatives or just the community, the same-sex community in general, are single-issue voters, but that's obviously not the case. They care about the economy. They care about, just as you said, everybody cares about the same things in this country. But for you, is it hard to vote for a Republican leader if you know that they don't support your lifestyle? Is that a conflict of interest?
It's not hard for me if the other, like Ronald Reagan said, if we can agree on 80% of the issues, it's more important to me where our country's going. I'm an American first before I'm a gay woman. And I care more about what's best for America and what's best for our country and the future of our country, because if that goes down the tubes, then nobody's going to care a whit about gay rights. So I care much more about the economic issues, national security, individual freedom and liberty, and jobs in the economy. And as a senior citizen, I care very much about the economic state of our country. So
I really appreciate what you said about being an American first. And I have to ask you, too, with all these rulings coming out, do you think this is going to be an election issue, even though most Americans obviously are concerned about the economy, as you said? Do you think this is going to be parlayed, especially by the left, to turn into a huge campaign issue, especially with all the rulings coming out right now?
Yes, I do. I think it can be an issue because the left makes it an issue, and the Republicans allow them to do so, instead of talking about, again, the true Republican values and what's good for our country and American exceptionalism. Republicans tend to get off the track, and therefore they let the left, who can't really talk about the future of our country and the economy and prosperity and economic freedom, because they can't talk about it because they're failing miserably at it. So they pick those issues and bait Republicans quite well on that issue.
Well, it seems like the left, and you know what, you might be seeing the right starting to pander too. Last question I have for you. Do you think either side is really sincere on this, on their support for same-sex marriage, or do you think it's just a way to get votes?
I think the left is very insincere about it right now, and they use it again as a wedge issue. And I think true people that believe in constitutional rights, I mean the Constitution and the law of the land, once they look at, like a Ted Olson or the folks that have led the charge on issues like Prop 8, against Prop 8, come around to the fact that, oh, it's a constitutional right. And under the Equal Protection Amendment of Amendment 14, sorry. So I think true believers, true constitutionalists come around to that point at a certain point. The religion aspect always mixes in there, and it's difficult for us that are gay as well. But if we're following the law of the land and not our religious beliefs,
which is what ultimately I think that's what we need to do. We always need to get back to the Constitution, and like you said, we really need to focus on the issues like the economy, and hopefully we can stay focused on those. But I agree with you. I hope that our party becomes maybe a little bit more tolerant, and we can stop focusing on these fringe issues and get to the core of where our country's really going.
Well, they're absolutely going in that direction, and our mayor here is a good example of that. And new generation Republicans like our Carl DeMaio, who's running for Congress here, and others who are at the beginning to open the doors and lead the way.
Yeah, we'll have to see how this shapes up, but thank you so much, Susan, for being here.
Thank you.
And coming up next, immigration. We've been hearing about it for months now. Our panel will weigh in when On Point returns. Stay with us.
The crisis on the border is one of the president's own making, but he still hasn't learned his lesson. Now he's threatened to rewrite the law and take more unilateral action on immigration in the coming months. Let me just be clear. Such action would create an even greater incentive for more illegal crossings and make the crisis on our border even worse.
Well, unless you've been living under a rock these past few months, you know immigration talks have dominated the headlines. A mass influx of illegal immigrants are crossing our border, bringing with them hopes and dreams, but also drugs and diseases. Whether they're dumped, deported, or defended, we have to figure out what to do with these people. Here to weigh in on this hot-button topic is political commentator Paul Cruz, Child Ambassador Wendy Lyon, and legal analyst Brian Pease. Thank you guys so much for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And let's dig into this very hot button topic right now. So I know as an American, I'm kind of outraged at what's going on right now. So I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts. Brian, let's hear what you have to say, immigration.
Well, okay, so first you have to kind of parse out, there's economic immigration, people coming here for job opportunities or perceived job opportunities, and then there's this humanitarian crisis that we're having at the border with the children that are being shipped up here basically from Central America, and there is a real humanitarian crisis occurring there, and it's because of the drug war. You have these drug cartels that are going in and they're inflicting all kinds of violence on these children, and it is something that's it's become exacerbated because of because of our federal drug policies. We're creating an environment where these drug cartels have a lot of economic power, and they essentially run these areas, and they're going into these schools and they're subjecting these kids to all kinds of violence. The kids are being shipped up here, so what do we do with them? So that's one issue is this humanitarian crisis. On the economic side, though, I would say that I would really point the finger at corporations that want to entice cheap labor to come here so that they can hire people to do things at a very, very low cost. And
I'm sure they're going to stop you too, but I have to stop you first. Do you think that corporations are turning on the magnet, or is the Obama administration saying, come on over, we're not going to deport you, bring your families over? I'm sure, Wendy, you look like you're ready to jump in on this one, because that's how I feel about it. I feel the Obama administration is turning on the magnet there.
Yeah, he definitely put it through. And the kids are just responding to that. They are of the understanding that if you come here, you're not going to be deported, that you're going to just fly under the radar and you're not going to be sent back. And with the inability of immigration to keep up with all of this, there's no way they're going to be able to deport
Are
all
they
these
trying
people.
to keep up with it, though? I mean, we've got Border Patrol agents playing babysitter, and they're kind of bending the rules a little bit. I don't think anybody is going to argue right now that we have border enforcement. Paul, what do you think? Are we
well,
enforcing
right now,
these borders?
that we're not, and that I think that right now that the president loves, as usual now, he loves to be the blame thrower in chief on this issue.
Absolutely.
And but also you have the Republicans who are not helping, and what is happening is that we have such a polarization between the Republicans and Democrats that neither one of them really want to try to find a solution. And I think that unfortunately the president has not been a leader on this subject. He has been given so many opportunities to be able to come in and show leadership. Because that we do have the considerations of that we have these children who are coming up, but at the same time that he wants to kind of he wants to keep playing the middle ground because he is ultimately right now, as other people have said, that right now he's very much he's no longer a president. He's right now acting more like a former president.
That's true, but he is also acting like an imperial president. And Brian, I'm going to give you a chance.
Yeah.
I'm going to give you a chance.
Exactly.
I would think right now he's coming out saying I'm going to push immigration reform through. So, Brian, what do you think about
somebody
this
has to take action. He is the president. If the Congress isn't willing to take action, somebody has to do something. We do need comprehensive immigration reform in this country.
But what about why can't we just be enforcing the laws that we have now?
Obama he has deported far more people than George Bush. He's doing these audits where they go in and they look at the companies that are hiring illegal undocumented workers, and they're essentially deporting people that way. But there is a lot at the local level that is just being overlooked. For instance, I'm from upstate New York. I can tell you about a factory farm there where they produce this product called foie gras. It's French for fattened liver. Mm-hmm. They make it by force feeding ducks. Americans aren't going to want to do this. So they literally ship up these undocumented migrant workers. They have about 300 of them living on site. They ship them up from Mexico, and it's totally abusive working conditions. It's this one farm in this country that's doing this, Hudson Valley foie gras, and the local authorities all turn turn a blind eye to the fact that they know that this company is hiring undocumented labor. They're abusing the labor. They're violating the animal cruelty laws, and they just get away with it. They're not providing a good American jobs. They're bringing these migrant workers up.
I would agree with you. But that's been the case for years now. We've got people bringing up people for labor purposes, but I think that the situation is changing because now we're bringing in women and children. And those aren't workers. I think those are pawns.
There was an activist by the name of Madeline Cosgrove, and many years ago, she's since passed. But one of the issues that were almost, which is kind of like the pink elephant in the room that nobody really wants to talk about, are all the diseases which are coming up. That right now.
I have to stop you right there. There's been scabies and things like that. That's not a major disease. There's lotions that you could get from Walmart, I think, that would address that. And there's one case of chickenpox that was a concern, but I would frankly be more concerned about Ebola coming back in the country than chickenpox any day.
But what about the drugs, Wendy? We can't argue. There are some people coming through for economic opportunities, but there are people that are seeking to do harm as well. Is that a fair statement, or do you guys completely disagree with me on that?
I think that people are going to get their drugs no matter what. And what happens is when we come down heavy-handedly with these federal agencies like the DEA that are basically, you're just driving it underground and you're giving the cartels money and power. And you remember Rick Perry couldn't remember the 3 agencies that he would abolish. I'll tell you an agency that I would abolish right now. It'd be the Drug Enforcement Agency, the DEA. They constantly and routinely violate Americans' Fourth Amendment rights, and we're imprisoning people on a massive level for nonviolent drug offenses. We have more people in prison than any other country in the world, both per capita and in raw numbers.
That might be a topic for another day. It is big business.
Yeah.
But you know what? I think we want to stay on immigration, but I think we're going to parlay it into discussions of elections. So with that, we're going to take a short break, but when we come back, we're going to get into midterm elections. So don't go anywhere. Well, before we know it, the leaves will change, and we all know what that means. Midterm election season is right around the corner, and it's never too early to start speculating. So I want to ask you guys, what are the issues and who are the heavyweights? Wendy, let's start with you. You haven't gotten a chance to talk that much. Tell us, who's gonna take Congress?
Well, It's got to, unless the Democrats can hide and keep as far away from Obama as possible.
They do a great job of that.
They do a pretty good job about that. And unless they can keep all the, the insurance premiums
scandals
going up, all of that down and keep it all low key, I would imagine the Republicans are going to take it. I mean, I just think with Obama's at 60% disapproval rate with immigration and everything else that's going on and not being handled well,
I think
not voting well.
You're seeing a lot of
Democrats.
Desperation on the Democratic Party because right now they see
True.
the writing on the wall that there are different political models which have been, vetted, that there was, either a 52% chance that the Democrats are going to lose the Senate, 65, and actually there's one that I believe was from a major newspaper that there was an 80% chance. And when you see how the president has aggravated his basic political base on the issue of immigration, and I think that at this point, that you'll have, Obamacare.
That's another big
God knows
failure
only
of the
know what we're going to
administration,
hear from that. But I think that right now that this issue of immigration, when you have so many families who are feeling that African American families who are feeling that they are getting bypassed.
I agree with you, but I want to turn to Brian, too, because he is our voice on the panel that's going to give us a different side of this. Are Democrats going to distance themselves from Obama and his record coming into these midterms?
I think it would be silly to do that, frankly. Obama,
Really?
I mean, the last, I remember Obama won the last two national
those
elections.
were years ago. Now he's starting to fail a little bit. We got a lot of scandals coming out.
When he's on the ballot, he seems to do pretty well, but every president's party tends to lose seats in the midterm elections. But a lot of the senators that are up for re-election now were 6 years ago, they were swept in because Obama was on the ballot. So now now that he's not on the ballot, that's, that could be a problem for them because not as many Democrats tend to vote when they don't have that presidential candidate. But Congress is kind of a different, or the House of Representatives is kind of a different story because there's so much gerrymandering there that you end up getting these weird districts that basically, I don't know if you know this, but 1.5 million more votes were cast for Democrats in the last congressional election than for Republicans, yet the Republicans control the House of Representatives, and it's just because of gerrymandering that they're able to continue.
Well, I wouldn't say it's just because of that. I think anytime you have a midterm election, it's a referendum on the president, and I think that the president is showing severe weaknesses here. But I would disagree with you when you say that Democrats aren't moving away from Obama, because I've been seeing that right and left. Wendy, what are your thoughts?
Well, they haven't even wanted to do public appearances with him and everything. It used to be bring the president with you everywhere you go so you can get his endorsement. I don't see a lot of that happening lately.
Well, there was one mayoral election that the president tried to be a part of, and there a rather milquetoast Republican candidate trounced the Democrat. Yeah.
Well, that's another thing. It's a special election. We have such low turnout.
However, but there have been so many situations that you've had all these bellwether situations that.
But that's hyper-local. I want to stay away from the very local elections. I want to take it to the national level because I've been seeing the big Democrats coming out. They're cozying up more to Bill Clinton right now than they are to President Obama, and that's not helping with all these scandals coming out. They do their best to bury them.
And we do know that the Clintons are not, they're not buddies with the Obamas.
Well, they try to make themselves seem like it, I would say, but.
Right. Well, and if you don't like Obama, then you don't be a hater.
Well, exactly.
That's the big thing. Don't be hating, So you're kind of damned if you do and damned if you don't, because if you don't, you get compartmentalized, labeled, and you're a crazy, as Lois Lerner would say.
But I think that also now what's going to be happening is that you are going to have a lot of red herring issues. That right now, all of a sudden, Hillary Clinton, came out and was already going into the middle of the whole thing with the Washington Redskins football team. And
there are fringe issues, but I want to.
But this is all deflection.
Well,
this is all deflection.
Right. I would agree with you that it's deflection. Every time there's a new scandal that comes out, we have another deflection to something else. But, Brian, I want to turn to you. What are going to be the issues then? Because I don't think the Democrats can run on Obamacare. I don't think they can run on immigration. So what can they run on at this point?
Listen to what Elizabeth Warren is saying. Somebody needs to stand up for the middle class. And they keep bringing bills in the Senate and trying to, and of course, you need 60 votes out of 100 to get anything done in the Senate because there's that filibuster rule. But, she's trying to do it. And she's really championing the economic issues that really that's the reason that people are struggling, is because we have such an extreme concentration of wealth at the very, very top, and the folks that are, just barely getting by. We have, crushing student debt, where the federal government is actually making money off of students at these super high interest rates, when we give the banks these, essentially 0% interest
But the thing
rates.
is, but however, I think there were all, in the sense that sometimes President Obama is a great Republican, because that he's the one who is hosting all the time, going up to L.A. and around the country.
He's the campaigner-in-chief.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, there you go.
But he's the one who is right now catering to the people who can only afford $35,000 a plate to go into his fundraisers, and I've always wondered if that right now, again, another deflection issue is the whole thing about the $15 living wage. I wonder if the servers at these posh events,
There's definitely a disparity there.
I wonder if they're getting. I wonder if they're getting $15 an hour.
Well, what's funny is that our middle class is shrinking, but in India and China, their middle class is growing. And that's giving kind of a more positive outlook for the economy throughout the world.
I think we all want great things for the economy, and I guess we're just going to have to see. But I think we have to get beyond the talking points, though, and we really need to dig in, and I don't know who's going to champion
Neither
it,
political party wants to handle it, because they just want to be able to appeal to whatever constituent. And here, that
I would see that
and
on
both
both
the
sides.
Republicans and Democrats, they want to appeal to the Latino community, and which is a very large growing base here in the United States.
I would definitely agree with you. I guess we're just going to have to wait and see. We only have a few months left, and I guess we'll see who takes it. Maybe the Republicans can do it, and obviously Brian's hoping that they can't, but we'll see where that goes. Thank you guys so much for being here. But coming up, paid maternity leave. It sounds wonderful, but there are costs. Women, listen up. You're not going to want to miss this. Stay with us.
Child care, workplace flexibility, a decent wage. These are not frills, they are basic needs. They shouldn't be bonuses, they should be part of our bottom line as a society. That's what we're striving towards.
So I want to turn now to the issues facing American families. President Obama recently hosted a day-long summit where he scolded the U.S. for not mandating paid maternity leave. But what he failed to mention are the hidden costs. And trust me, there are several. Joining me now to give her take on this issue is D.C. attorney and legal journalist Alex Sawyer. So Alex, once again, these entitlement programs sound great on paper, but they have their cost. Many employers are still reeling from the Obamacare mandate, and now this administration wants to stick them with yet another regulation. But what are your thoughts?
Well, definitely it comes between moving women and advancing them in the workplace and the costs to the businesses and employers. And that's been the real issue since, this has been an ongoing debate since 2010. And it's really the businesses that have stood up and said, we can't afford this. And it would really hurt employers in the long run.
Well, absolutely. And I think from my perspective, it would harm women as well, because although they might be getting this paid maternity leave down the line, what about the pre-employment discrimination? Because from a business standpoint, if you're looking at a woman of childbearing age, you may not hire her over a man because you know that she might be having a kid soon. And so then she's out of a job altogether. She's not even considered as much as a man. So how come they're not talking about this? What is your take?
Absolutely. You're so right. And, during my research for all of this, I was looking into it, and they were discussing, all these mainstream media were really looking into how what we can credit for women's advancements since the 70s. And they named the Civil Rights Act, and then they named birth control. And I was like, so is birth control really the reason why?
Yet again.
I'm a 26-year-old DC-based attorney woman. Is that, birth control didn't get me there. So
exactly.
I really have a hard time believing that. So I found that hard to believe. The other thing that the president has really pushed is that saying the United States is the only industrialized country that doesn't offer paid maternity leave. And to an extent, he is correct. The thing that many outlets aren't reporting is that Japan, Germany, Canada, Denmark, all of these other industrialized countries who do have paid maternity leave don't pay your temporary workers, your civil servants. So it would be the same discrepancy that we see here in terms of your professional salaried women who do have some benefits with some employers, 16%. Right. And then you have your hourly workers who might run into more problems. The same gap falls in other industrialized countries that do have paid maternity leave. It's really not a comparison as the White House is pushing.
Well, you know what he likes to use, like you said, he likes to use other countries as an example over and over again, but the numbers he doesn't recognize are countries like France and Norway where women hold less prominent positions, so they're not in as high of positions. So whereas you have a lot of women in the workforce, maybe they're not the CEOs, because guess what? These companies, although some Fortune 500 companies can afford to hire these women and give them these great packages, other small businesses can't, and they can't afford having someone leave mid-job because, again, that's impacting their business in a time when the economy should be the most important thing. What do you think about this from a business standpoint?
Oh, absolutely. And even from an individual standpoint, it's one, discussing how this would affect an employer, but two, also that's another tax coming out of your paycheck every week. Right. The way California runs theirs is similar to disability insurance, and it's a percentage that comes out of every weekly paycheck. And, you know, some people say, I think it's Senator Guilford from, I believe it's a Democrat out of New York. She says it's like equivalent to a cup of coffee a week. Well, add that up. You know, there's a reason why people don't go to Starbucks every day. And so I really think from not only employer standpoint, from employees, from us, from the Americans.
For women, exactly. Because, Alex, this is what I don't understand. Is they like to push this on us a lot. From what I see from the left, they're pandering to women over and over again. But what they don't recognize is that someone has to pay for this. Again, there's no such thing as a free lunch. So this comes somewhere. People look at it and everything looks so hunky-dory, but then you stop and you look at the bare bones of these things and you realize, who is this really benefiting?
You're so right. You are absolutely right. You just hit the nail on the head.
You and I are both career professionals, and honestly, I can't say that I would want to take maternity leave for that long of time. In some countries like Norway, they get up to a year of paid leave. I don't know about you, but career-minded women, at least from what I've seen in this country, they don't want to take a year off of their career to sit at home. That's why they entered the workforce in the first place.
You're absolutely right. And that's why most employers, that is, give their employees 6 weeks. And that seems to be enough. Discussing this with other women who have had children, you know, my mom's a career-minded woman like myself and you, and we were discussing this. She's like, to be honest, like I never really saw myself wanting to stay at home any more than that. You know, as soon as you're ready to go back, you're ready to go back. And it's also healthy, I believe, you know, at least coming from that type of adult, like upbringing as an adult. I really respect my mother with everything that she juggled, and I plan to do the same. And so there's really, you know, it's every individual is different. What can you say? We do see in California that they are able to retain more women in the workforce with their new law that went into play. I believe it was July of 2004.
Right. It's been in place for a while.
Right. And Google has recently changed their plan. It used to be 3 months of partial pay maternity leave.
But Alex, they can afford that. I mean, we're turning into companies like Google. They can afford to do that. These small companies, small businesses, necessarily can't. And I want to close with, I think we all understand that each company should be able to choose. So that's exactly what they should be left to do. Each company, if they can afford it, should be able to set their own mandates on this. But a federal mandate could be crippling. And I think,
absolutely.
You know, each woman might prefer, you and I, obviously, we're in agreement. We don't necessarily think that paid maternity leave is important to us necessarily. Some women obviously are going to take a different take. And I don't think it's important for us to debate the merits of it. More so, I think it's important for us to shed light on the hidden costs, because no one else is doing that. And I'm so glad that you were able to join me and shed some light on those, because I think it's important to get out there, and it's important for two women to be able to discuss that as well. So thank you so much, Alex, for talking with me. I really appreciate it. And coming up next, the latest controversy that's setting the social media world abuzz. Find out when On Point returns. Welcome back to On Point. Well, on an episode of ESPN's First Take, Stephen A. Smith got himself into some hot water while debating about the NFL's 2-game suspension of Ray Rice following domestic violence allegations. His comments took a turn for the worse. Take a look.
Is that, again, and this is what I've done this all my life, let's make sure we don't do anything to provoke wrong actions. Because if I come or somebody else come, whether it's law enforcement officials, your brother, or the fellas that you know, if we come after somebody has put their hands on you, it doesn't negate the fact that they already put their hands on you. So let's try to make sure that we can do our part in making sure that that doesn't happen.
Well, Smith later apologized on air and called his comments, quote, the most egregious error of his career. However, ESPN still suspended him from the network for a week. Normally, I'm not one to agree with the PC police, but Smith's comments were obviously out of line, even if he did say there is never a reason to put your hands on a woman. To suggest that women are somehow responsible for abuse is completely inappropriate and wrong. There is another interesting element to the story, though, that I can't overlook. He got blasted on social media for his comments and received a temporary suspension from the network. But is it enough? Think about it. Compare this to Donald Sterling's incident. Now, Sterling's offensive comments in a private phone call caused a firestorm that continues to this day. Not only was he raked over the coals by pretty much everyone, he was forced to sell his team. Smith's comments got him a few days of bad press and a short suspension. So why the double standard? I don't get it. What's the threshold for offensive comments? How do the PC police determine who gets a get-out-of-jail-free card and who gets locked up for life? Unfortunately, it's a code we may never be able to crack, but I digress. And I want to switch gears now to a topic that's very close to my heart, the so-called war on women. Here's the darling of the movement, Sandra Fluke, with more Give Me That Politics. Take a look.
I hear from yet another woman from Georgetown or from another school or who works for a religiously affiliated employer, and they tell me that they have suffered financially, emotionally, and medically because of this lack of coverage.
Oh yes, the infamous war on women. The message from the left is clear. Women Republicans hate you. But wait, what? If that's the case, then I guess you could say I'm going through a bit of identity crisis, because the last time I checked, I don't hate myself. So that brings us to the Democrats. Ladies, do they really love us as much as they proclaim to? They don't have your back, they want your vote. The various bills sponsored by Democrats and endorsed by President Obama actually do very little, if anything, for us. If you want to talk about a war on women, let's talk about how the policies of the Obama administration have hurt women and middle-class families. How? Well, under this president, take-home pay has decreased, and the poverty rate among women is the highest it's been in almost 2 decades. Over 5.2 million women are unemployed. To make matters worse, electricity and the price of goods have soared, all while college tuition continues to rise. And oh yeah, thanks to Obamacare, healthcare insurance premiums are going through the roof. And if you ask me, this sounds like much more of a war on women and families and the middle class. So let's debunk this so-called war on women right now. 1. Pro-life does not mean anti-woman. This is the typical claim made by pro-choice Democrats. Opposing abortion or simply not wanting to fund it doesn't mean pro-lifers and social conservatives hate women. Quite the opposite. Second, Republicans, especially Republican males, want to control our bodies. But wait a second, I detect some hypocrisy here. Doesn't the individual mandate enforced under Obamacare do just that by limiting our healthcare choices and allowing an unelected advisory board to decide what treatments will be federally funded? And third, Republicans want to deny you contraception. But hold on, just because Republicans don't want our contraceptives to be free, paid for by taxpayers, or mandated under Obamacare, doesn't mean they want to take anything away from us. And finally, Republicans want to get you to be paid less. But false. Again, equal pay for equal work has been law for decades. Legislation like Lilly Ledbetter and the Paycheck Fairness Act benefit trial lawyers, not women. Ladies, we're smarter than this. According to the Media Research Institute survey of the American consumer, nearly 75% of women identify themselves as the primary household shopper. So we know how to make decisions for ourselves and for our families. So don't buy into this false war on women. And that's all the time we have for today. And thanks for getting on point with me. Until next time, take care.